All right. Well, welcome to this new installment of the Golda Meir Centers for Political Leadership and Political Science Department at Metropolitan State University's virtual speaker series here in spring of 2020. Today's guest is Alum of Metropolitan State University, a political science major, 2017 President's Award winner, and currently a third-year law student at Washington University at St. Louis's Law School, one of the top 20 law schools in the country, so a really well-accomplished individual, and is in his third year, his last year of law school, and is here to give us a little bit of perspective, both in terms of the law school admissions process, as well as kind of his experiences and sharing some of those experiences with you, our students, who might be thinking about kind of going to law school. So welcome, Chris Escobar. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very, yeah, no, thanks for taking the time. I think, well, we all have lots of time right now, don't we, to share some
Yeah,
thoughts.
too much time.
Right. So now you're holed up in St. Louis still, right? In virtual classrooms for law school as well?
That's right. Still in St. Louis. The plan right now is to go to New York in the fall, but who knows what's going on with that right now.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll revisit that and talk about that a little bit towards the end. I thought maybe we would have a little bit of discussion about law school and the admissions process and what folks can do to set themselves up for a strong application and maybe what law schools are looking for, what worked for you. And so, to start, you got into, I think I just looked earlier today, it's ranked 17th in the country, and I'm sure that's something that you folks know. I'll generally say a top 20 law school, and that's really remarkable to get in. Can you give a little insight? I mean, there's strong LSAT scores, I'm sure, a good GPA, I know. You're one of our students. What else did you do, or you wish you would have done at your time at Metro that really helped set up a strong application?
Sure. I think I was actually presented with a lot of unique opportunities at Metro, and part of that is just the brand that comes with a Metro student. When you think of a Metro student, you're thinking of somebody who probably goes to work as well as goes to school and was working full time. And I think that that was a unique opportunity that I got at Metro that I wouldn't have gotten at a place like Boulder or Fort Collins. So I think that we really need to be able to take advantage of that and work not just to pay the bills, but try and gain some skills while we work as well. Found that that can be a really huge differentiator, both in law school applications as well as your ultimate job applications.
So was it just work, or was it a type of work? I mean, I imagine there, because we have internships certainly that we encourage our students to do, but the reality is a lot of folks just trying to pay bills. But is it worth making that extra effort to find a job if you need to that fits in with what you want to do, and what kind of job might that be?
So the interesting thing about law is that there's no right way to approach it. There's no one guaranteed path, right? So for me, I actually worked in sales for about 2.5 years while I was an undergraduate. Uh, that doesn't sound like it's necessarily a lawyerly job, but I found that to be able to sit down one on one with somebody and be able to persuade them and be able to make a connection with them is actually exactly what lawyers do. Whether they're litigators or more transactional attorneys that focus on contract drafting, their job is interacting with people and creating those relationships. And I found that sales is really great for that. Now, I'm not saying that sales is the only way. There are many ways. All I'm saying is with that is that just find something that's not just like, all right, like I'm going to do this mindless job. Try and find something that's going to somehow create a skill that you can leverage in your future.
Sure. Oh, and within, whatever job you have, kind of find those skills that might be useful, and accentuate them and recognize them. All right, that makes sense. How about on campus? Were there other things that you did? I mean, you're busy, I know, and studying, and you did well in school, but were there other things on campus, involvements that you might have either wished you had done more of, or that you did and worked out well?
I mean, I was pretty involved overall. I tried to do a lot of different activities. So I was on the rugby team, for example, which is, again, not like necessarily, oh, if you go on the rugby team, like you're going to be in law school one day. I think the general consensus would actually be the opposite. If you go into rugby, you're going to lose all your brain cells. Uh, but I tried to make sure that I was well rounded and not just exclusively focusing on school. I tried to have things that were fun to me. So I did a little bit of student government. I did rugby. I did. I think at one point I was in the school band. I did quite a bit.
Yeah, no, well, it's good. I mean, and you can take advantage of those things, and then those kind of filter in through your application. So, how about LSAT prep? What did you do for that? My wife's a lawyer, and I think she read, this was back in the day, had the book and opened it up, but we were at a point in our lives where paying for much more of anything else wasn't possible. But,
Sure.
one, obviously taking it seriously, but is there other things that you would recommend, or
Well,
hype
I,
of it?
I actually, to the extent that somebody is capable and fortunate enough to be capable, I would recommend a class. I was able to spend the extra money on a class. I found for me that that was really helpful because I had dedicated time every week that I knew this is when I'm studying for the LSAT. I had somebody there whose job it was to make sure that I was getting better at the LSAT. Um, some people are not going to be that fortunate though, and I recognize that. And the only advice I can really give in that position, because I personally was never in that position, is just do your best, right? Like make sure that you're really giving it the time. You're going into those books as much as you can. Take practice tests and review those tests. Review why you got certain questions wrong, as well as why you got certain questions right. It's important to understand not just that you got a right or wrong answer, but how you got there.
Is it possible to overestimate the impact of a good LSAT score? I mean, is it?
I think it is. Well, let me. There's a little caveat to that. There's a direct correlation between your LSAT score and the quality of school that you get into and the scholarship that you get. So if you absolutely knock the LSAT out of the park, there's no question that you will probably have your pick of schools and you will probably have very good scholarships to all of those. At the same time, if your LSAT is not perfect or it's not even that great, that's not the end of the world. You mentioned earlier, I'm at the number 17th ranked law school in the country. I got a 70% scholarship there, but my LSAT is actually very much in line with the national average. And I'm very, very, very far below my school's median for the LSAT. So it's not the end of the world if you don't do well, but the benefits to doing well far exceed anything else.
Sure. Yeah, at the very least, you get a few more options. So, I mean, how many, if you don't mind, how many schools did you apply to? What were your choices? And then what was that? I mean, what was that decision rule that finally led you to Wash U?
So I applied to way too many schools, and to the extent that you can avoid that, I would not do that. It just made my life harder. It made my life much more expensive because even if you get application fee waivers, you still have to pay something like 30 or $40 per application. So I would highly recommend against that. Uh, so for me, I was in kind of a unique situation where my LSAT was like not super good, but my GPA was out of the park. So I had to kind of apply to a lot of schools because I didn't know where I fit. I'm sure most people at this point are familiar with the concept of like your safety schools, your reach schools, and your fit schools. I didn't really have those. Now, in terms of where I actually got accepted and where I actually selected, I was really fortunate that the best ranked school that I got into also gave me the biggest scholarship. And I was also fortunate that I kind of liked the school. It wasn't just like, someplace I knew I wasn't going to fit. Coming from Metro and coming from an immigrant family that always had to work and everything. I didn't know what my life was going to be like at an elite school. I thought that I might kind of be an outcast. But I found that for me, the vibe was good and I didn't have to worry too much about that. So those three criteria have to factor in the ranking, the money, and I forgot the third one. I was literally just talking about it.
It's just
But
how you fit in,
the
right?
vibe and the fit. The
Yeah.
fourth one is the location. Um, you're going to be there for 3 years. And more importantly, uh, there's a very good chance that you will start your career where you go to law school. So you can think of this as 5 years of your life. You don't want to be miserable.
Right, right. No, definitely. Well, a good point. Many years ago, I had a buddy from undergrad that went to Tulane Law School in New Orleans, and I never quite understood how you could too many distractions, I guess, as much as anything.
Mm.
All right, so you got into this law school, you got into law school, you got into several, chose for all the usual reasons: money, cost, location, right, fit, prestige. And once you get into law school, I mean, what were there? This is were there the moments where this is not what I expected, or were there moments of this is it's a continuation of undergraduate work? I mean, what were those surprises that came up as you kind of started the process?
So I think this would probably be the case for anybody who would actually take the time to watch this. You do a lot of research and you pretty much know what to expect just from reading different things online. You hear about like the Socratic method and the cold calls and the amount of reading that goes into it. You hear about all of that. Um, I will say that I still underestimated it. Even hearing all the different horror stories, I absolutely underestimated how intimidating some of these things can be. Uh, I got my first reading assignment for my first class of law school, and it was like 120 pages. And I was like, oh, this won't be too bad. I'll just do this like the day before. I was already being stupid like the day before law school. It takes a lot of time. You have to really be diligent. Um, so in that regard, it is just a larger quantity of work than undergraduate could ever simulate. Um, beyond that, the way that you interact in class is also very different. It's not just sit down and take your notes. You have to interact with the material in class in a way that it was pretty unfamiliar for me. Um, overall, though, the concept is pretty similar, right? You learn the material and you take a test on it. If you do well, then you get a good grade, and if you don't, then you don't.
Right. So now, when you get in law schools, generally there's a set courses that first year in particular, right? Not a lot of choices, and then generally some tracks as you move forward. Does it get more comfortable? I mean, both in terms of the material, but also in terms of the expectations and the routine.
Absolutely. I think a skill that I gained in law school that I did not expect to gain was the ability to read these huge passages in a manageable amount of time. You know, this 120-page reading that I mentioned earlier, that took me all day and I still didn't finish it.
Right.
Um, that's even if you were to assign that to me today, that's still a lot of reading. But I could do that in a few hours now. It's not that I'm reading faster. I just know how to read it better. You learn what in the book that you need to pinpoint. It's not just bold word hunting because you're digging through these Supreme Court opinions and whatever, but you just learn how lawyers and how judges write and present their ideas. So it does get more manageable as you kind of start to get into the groove yourself.
Sure. What was the toughest class you've taken so far?
Uh, well,
One of those
there,
early
there's
ones
there's
where you
two.
didn't know, or new stuff, or
What's that?
the early ones when you're first starting out, you just didn't get it, or classes you didn't like, or I mean,
So my least favorite course was civil procedure, and that might be part of why I'm not going to be a litigator. I think most people, when they think of lawyers, they think that you have to be up in court, but I've learned that that is not true. You can be basically a contract drafter and contract negotiator, which is what I'm going to be doing. So I really hated civil procedure. Um, don't really know why. For whatever reason, I would just read it and it would just not stick at all. But it wasn't necessarily the hardest class that I had because civil procedure is just very rule oriented. X gets you to Y, and that's that. Uh, a lot of it will depend not necessarily on the material, but on the professor that you have. So, as an example, torts is often considered one of the easier law school courses, but my professor was very intense. And it was almost like the paper chase, to be honest with you. Him calling somebody an idiot in the middle of the class was not unheard of.
Right.
So
Ooh,
I
yeah.
found his class to be really challenging because he just held you to such a high standard. So
Right.
it just depends. I think it's more professor based rather than content based.
Wow. Is it, were there any things in undergrad that prepared you to a greater extent, or things you wish you wouldn't have thought were important for law school, um, that you did at the time think were really necessary? I mean, what advice for students in terms of their coursework or stuff that they need to think about? I know writing probably is one.
Yeah. So one of the things I mentioned already is try to learn from work experiences. That is something that is unique to Metro. That you can't underestimate the amount that that can benefit you, not only as a lawyer, but even as a student. Um, but in terms of undergraduate itself, um, first of all, your habits that you create now are going to be the habits that you have in law school. You know, one of the best, well, it's not really a good joke, but it's a joke about like, oh, this is going to be the semester that I really kick it together. I'm going to organize myself. If that's never happened for you, it's not going to magically change in law school. I have found that although I was much more diligent, the first month of law school than I was an undergraduate, I kind of just went back to my old habits. So the habits you have now, start trying to change them if they're not good. If they are good, try to keep them.
Yeah,
As far as uh, classwork, I mentioned earlier that there's no real right way to get into law school. You can pretty much take any path to get there. To the extent that you're somebody who knows exactly what they want to do, go ahead and specialize. If you know for just absolutely for a fact, I want to do criminal defense, like, yeah, go take like your poli sci classes, your criminal justice courses, and you'll be fine. But if you have even a little bit of doubt, I would personally recommend trying to be as versatile as possible. So I was actually undeclared for 2.5 years. And I found that to be really nice because I was able to take classes not only in political science, but I took courses from the business school and in psychology, and different writing courses. And I found that those are all really helpful on the three levels of communication. And the three levels of communication, what I mean by that is level one is on paper in writing. Level two is one-on-one communication. And level three is a presentation to a broader group. And I mentioned earlier, that's basically what lawyers do. They write something, they negotiate things, and they present it to people. That's what a lawyer does.
right. So make sure you have those skills, right? And somehow,
Right.
however you get them in whatever coursework. Sure, that makes sense. So, one, kind of getting towards the end of this discussion, one, the reality is law school is about getting a job and becoming a lawyer. Um, One thing that's very different about law school is the internship process, right? Where you have, an internship perhaps between your second and first and second year, and then another one in between your second and third year, and then that second internship often turns into a job, or at least an audition for a job. So how does that work? What was your experience?
How does the second internship work?
Well, no, both the first and the second. I mean, I know that you worked for a major energy company. Between your first and second year, and then this major firm your second and third year. I think it's a very different process, or at least in terms of the expectations and what an internship in law school looks like than it does in undergrad.
So it's actually a process that's a little bit in flux right now. When I started law school, there was an organization that kind of set certain guidelines on how law student recruiting was supposed to work. They had certain requirements of employers as well as students for just how to conduct yourselves throughout this process. They recently, about maybe 9 months ago, changed all their guidelines to be very hands off and laissez faire. So this landscape is changing very quickly.
Hmm.
When I started, first year law students were not allowed, just period, not allowed to interact with employers their first semester. You weren't allowed to apply for jobs until your second semester of law school. The idea is that you're supposed to focus and integrate and all that good stuff. Um, the first internship that you get, oftentimes for first year students, comes pretty late in the process as a result. There were some people that had their job offers in January, but I personally had my first job offer the week after finals and started the following week. And that's not necessarily uncommon. What's interesting though is that hiring for the second internship takes place during your first internship. So I was actually leaving my first internship to go interview for the next year.
Oh, yeah, that
So
comes.
it's go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, I think that lag time between the early establishment of that internship, right, or knowing where you're going to go is pretty unique, at least in terms of relative to undergraduate internships and our students' experiences.
Yeah, it's also kind of frustrating because you
Hmm.
have to have such a good knowledge of what you want to do and where you want to be at a time when it seems like your life is still so uncertain. I was kind of fortunate that I sort of knew that I wanted to be in New York. The only reason I knew that was because my significant other was from New York. She wanted to go back to New York. Um, so it was pretty easy. Like if I want to be with her, I'm going to go to New York too.
Right.
But if you're not in that position, if you don't know where you want to be, it's like, all right, I got to figure out where the heck in the United States I want to be, what I want to do, and know it pretty much 2 years before that decision was supposed to have been made.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot, and particularly and with what 1.5, 2 years of law school under your belt, right? So not even that
Right.
much time to kind of figure those things out. Yeah, it's a lot to. I mean, it's a lot to ask. I mean, it's worked out well for you. I know it's worked out, well for lots of our alums, but yeah, it's a different process. So I'm really glad to have some of that insight. We're getting close to the end. Is there any other major pieces of advice, or major, minor pieces of advice that you might want to throw out to our graduates right now? And a lot of them are kind of facing uncertainty given the COVID-19 situation and questions about whether they're going to go to school or not, or law schools for the folks that have gotten in, job market kind of concerns in the long run. But
Sure.
anything?
So I think I have a few things to say. And number one is, to the extent that you are facing difficulties surrounding this virus, whether it's impacting you or your family, that always comes first. You can never replace your family. You can never replace those memories. Uh, as much as you think you might want to be a lawyer or do whatever in life, that always comes first. Uh, Beyond that, though, I would encourage, assuming everything gets back to normal as soon as possible, I would encourage people to just take control of what they can control. So just do as well as you can in classes. Work really hard. Just try to understand the material, and if you don't get it, go to the professor and get more eyes on your work, right? Like run it by people. If you're writing a paper, get more people to read it. It sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but it'll pay back. And the other thing is, when you do your applications, have people help you with that too. Don't lone wolf it. I know I worked with Dave Wyden quite a bit. Uh, I think we went through probably like 8 or 9 different drafts of my personal statement together. And you know, he didn't have to do that. It wasn't his job to do that. He just did it because he's a nice guy. Uh, so just have people help you. It never hurts to have another opinion. And what you're going to have is everything, every time you submit, every time you have somebody give you feedback, you're always going to get that much stronger.
No, that's fantastic advice. Dr. Wyden's still around, by the way, and he's always willing to help out, and the rest of us as well. So um, definitely. Well, you know, Chris, it was great to catch up with you again. I appreciate taking time out of your schedule to communicate some of your experiences and knowledge and some advice to our students. We really much appreciate it. So
Sure.
thank you again. I'm going to stop the recording here in a second and appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And if anybody needs anything, they can obviously reach out to you. But I'm a resource too. So if you have questions for me in particular, for whatever reason, I don't know why you would. Uh, I don't think I'm that valuable, but you know, just reach out to Professor Preuss, and I'll put you in touch with me.
Right. No, definitely. And please do, because actually Chris and anybody else that's in the speaker series are happy to do that, and just get a hold of me and I'll be happy to put you in touch with them if you have questions about law school in this particular case, or thinking about ranks or admissions, those kind of things. Chris is a great guy and he'd be more than happy to help you out. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, once again. And thanks for joining us, everybody else, on our Golda Meir virtual speaker series, spring 2020.